Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot. This evening we're continuing our deck study of the Jungian Taro Deck by Robert Wang, and we are working with the Strength card tonight, our Major Arcana card, one of the daughter archetypes in the Jungian Tarot. We'll get more into this archetype as we continue this evening. Just take a moment. Absorb the imagery. And these are my companion books, the Jungian Tarot and its Archetypal Imagery, and Tarot Psychology. Now, you don't have to have these books to have this deck, but I've found that it's really helped me understand the symbolism, the artwork of this particular deck. Okay, and without any further ado, we're going to pan down. See, that's all the camera time I think I have in me for this evening. But yeah, let's continue. Here we have the accompanying guidebook, and that gives us an overview of the interpretation of this card. Just kind of reading from the guidebook here. Strength commonly represents or is represented by the zodiac sign of Leo, and in this deck, strength is the archetype of original woman, representing strength, creative energy, sexual power, solar energy, which is commanding and outgoing, control from the background, a desire to rule but a dislike of prominence, and boundless enthusiasm, and a bright appearance. And there may be instances of anger that flare up, but they quickly dissipate. So there's a genuine idea of strength as overall optimistic. I'm tapping into quiet strength, and that tends to be akin to the standard interpretation of the strength card. Some of the keywords being overcoming obstacles and endurance. And if we take into account reversals, it can represent apprehension or lack of confidence. That tends to be a major theme of this card. Quiet strength, quiet power as opposed to brute strength and force. And I think I'll probably edit in a cutaway here. But yeah, so that's just kind of an overview of this card. Usually when I'm meditating with the card, I like to allow myself 5 minutes to just kind of take in the imagery and just sort of look at the images, the symbolism, and see what sticks out to me, irrespective of the specific interpretation for the card. And that might be a good practice to have if you're new to tarot. Of course, learning the interpretations of each card is very helpful. It'll give you more insightful readings. But sometimes just being led by the artwork will just sort of open up your imagination, will open up your interaction with the card, and will just kind of help you be more intuitive in your understanding of the card. So let's take a look at our strength card here. And for comparison, we have the Rider-Waite Smith Coleman deck. I try to include every author, every creator of this card. We have the Strength card. I have the Witchy Cauldron deck, which has taken some liberties with the background, for better or for worse. But this is a representation of what the Strength card generally looks like, or the Rider-Waite Smith Coleman deck. And we have, again, back to the Jungian Tarot. Just take in a little bit more of the imagery. There's the similarities between the Rider-Waite and the Jungian Tarot deck. Of course, there is the Lady Strength, and there is the Lion. The Lion tends to be red in standard tarot, or at least in some of the earlier tarot, and we can see the comparison there. So aside from the similarities between the cards, the Maiden and the Red Lion, you can take a look at some of the other imagery we have here. Let's see, take a moment. Of course, I like to include commentary, just notes from my readings, and maybe just kind of some of my own insights about the imagery of the cards. Now, if you find that distracting, of course, please feel free to mute. And I think we can take the next 5 minutes to just sort of take in the imagery of the card. So looking at the deck, or looking at the card rather, what are some of the images that stick out to you? We've got the lady, and we've got the lion to start. That tends to be where our eyes go immediately. And in this deck, I think it's kind of a comparison point. The way that the lady is interacting with the card in the Jungian Taro Deck versus the Rider-Waite Smith. In the Jungian deck, the lion appears to be pretty subdued, pretty docile. She's simply resting her hand on the lion's head, even though it looks like in the Rider-Waite Coleman deck, it looks like the maiden, Lady Strength, is being a little more active with the lion. Not necessarily out of fear, not particularly aggressive, but it looks like she's prying the lion's mouth open or whatnot. But in the Jungian deck, the lion appears to be completely subdued, submissive in fact, just standing and allowing the lady to rest her hand on its head. So that's the image that stands out to me immediately. But taking in more of the imagery of this card, I'm drawn to the image that I'm drawn to the most is the staircase in the back, which I find really unusual. But also the waters. We have the waters that are going in and out of the cave, going in and out from under the bridge, and we have the 3 candles sitting in the water. And those candles, it can make you wonder what those candles represent. And sorry for that notification. I thought I muted all of that. But yeah, what do you think the symbolism of the candles in the water might be? And what do the waters represent to you? That seems like that's a very, let's say, significant difference to the Rider-Waite Smith deck, Rider-Waite Coleman. I get a little confused over what's the best way to refer to that deck. I've heard so many different things. And of course, it wants to be inclusive of the artists, particularly Pamela Coleman. But yeah, so we've got the cave, we've got the tunnel, we've got the water that flows in and out, and we have the staircase going downward. And we also, in the background, have the image of the original man. We'll get to him in a little bit. In the foreground, we have the plants, the flora, and we also have the round sigil. Now, the sigil I find very interesting. I think it picks up the colors in the background very well. But I do kind of wonder what the sigil represents. I've noticed in each of the Jungian Tarot cards, there is that round sigil. Sometimes I can pick up on the imagery or the symbolism within the sigil immediately. But in this case, I'm having a little bit of trouble with that. So I'd love to know what you think of that sigil, the round little shield right in front of the lion. What do you think the symbolism could be for that? And of course, we have the Lady Strength holding the sun to her chest. And of course, the sun has the association of the zodiac sign of Leo, along with, quite obviously, the lion. So I think that's definitely a really good thing to keep in mind when you think of Leo. What are some of the qualities that are associated with Leo as a zodiac sign? We can take this moment to just continue to absorb the card. Now, you might not necessarily need 5 minutes to take in the image of the card, but I like to. I think it helps me to absorb all the imagery. And from there, when I start the meditation, I like to construct an inner landscape, just kind of use my imagination. And usually that leads me to very interesting interactions with the card. Um, my imagination will allow me to traverse the card, be a part of the imagery. Maybe there's a part of the background that just kind of fires up my imagination, a point of entry to understanding the card. So now we're getting into our 15-minute meditation. And this is the part where I'll probably give some more insight based on my study of the companion books and some notes that I've made. I'm going to do my best to follow a script so the commentary isn't super disjointed or all over the place. But again, if you find it distracting and you'd prefer to just focus on the imagery of the card rather, now would be a good point for you to go ahead and mute me, if that'll help you concentrate. There's a lot of really interesting points that I found in studying this particular deck. One of the things that I think is worthwhile to keep in mind is that even though the image of the maiden and the lion have come to be standard, particularly in the tarot depictions of the strength card, that hasn't always been the case. If you go back to ancient art, there's definitely the association of the strong man subduing the lion, perhaps even being engaged in battle, an aggressive battle with the lion as a show of strength. Notably, you might have seen images of, say, Hercules slaying a lion, and that's a pretty well-known theme of strength in ancient art. In fact, in one of the earliest iterations of tarot, particularly the Visconti Sforza deck, that's another deck I'm very fascinated by, and I would like to get a copy of that deck, or not a copy of the deck. I'd like to get that deck at some point, as it's one of the earlier classical tarot decks. But in that deck, as far as I understand, the image of strength is represented by a Herculean figure, a very masculine figure, dealing aggressively with a lion. Now, if you're familiar with this deck, let me know if that's correct. I haven't had really a lot of encounters with the Sforza deck, but let me know what you think if you have experience with that particular deck. But over the course of the development of tarot, however, Hercules' slaying of the lion, that imagery was supplanted by the image of the lion being tamed by the virtue of strength, generally in the form of a maiden, of a young lady. Now, strength in tarot came to be personified by a female figure, conquering the raging animal, and we'll get more into that particular symbolism as we continue. And there are also decks depicting the virtue of strength as a woman standing beside a literal pillar, a literal column representing the proverbial pillar of strength. And that particular imagery was popular usually around the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the idea of virtues and vices came along, which sort of shifted the way that virtuous imagery was depicted in art, and of course how that trickled down to tarot. The idea of virtues and vices was prevalent in the art of the Middle Ages and informed by a lot of artwork and literature of the time, or represented rather by a lot of artwork and imagery, including, say, Virgil's The Aeneid. And the idea of the seven virtues became a standard theme throughout art. And of the seven virtues, there were the three theological virtues. Of course, there's honor, hope, and charity. Now, that leaves four remaining virtues, and those virtues were deemed as cardinal virtues, the virtues of strength, justice, prudence, and temperance. Now, if you're a tarot reader or an enthusiast, you probably already recognize the fact that four of those are major arcana cards in standard tarot. There's the strength card that we're studying this evening. There's also justice and temperance. Now, there isn't a major arcana card that's designated as prudence, But over the course of art history and tarot history, there's been the association of prudence with the High Priestess card, which I find very fascinating. There was a chapter, or rather, the the chapter that I read in the Jungian imagery book really went into more detail as to the parallels between prudence and the high priestess. I won't necessarily get into that here, but if I reimagine, or not reimagine, but if I re-examine the high priestess card, I'll probably give more information on that there. I found that very fascinating. Now, strength in this particular Jungian deck is an expression of the archetypal original woman, which I also find interesting. When you think of original woman, there is the obvious association with original man, which in this deck is associated, of course, with Adam. There's the first man, original man, Adamic archetype that has appeared throughout a few of the cards that we've studied in this particular deck. I'll take a moment to absorb the imagery again. Now, when we think about the archetypal structure of this deck, we've had the archetypes of father, mother, son, and daughter. When we think of the original woman, as this particular card tends to represent, we've had the archetype of this particular archetype is the daughter who absorbs or gathers life experiences and applies the lessons of the mother and the father. And I guess that could coincide with the original woman and, of course, the original man as well. Now, going back to him just a little bit, we first explored the original man imagery in the Hierophant card, the Hierophant being the father archetype of father as lawgiver. And he held the original man in one of his hands, the original man on fire, offering a transformative sort of influence on the original man. And that symbolism continues in the lover card as well, where the original man or the Adam figure is more prominently represented. It's represented in the central figure and also in one of the smaller, in the image of the smaller couple. Now, when we return to our strength card, of course, we do have the original man or Adam, but he's in the background. He's the figure standing on top of the purple bridge and not as prominent, which I thought was fascinating. So we'll take another moment to just kind of observe the card. And as we continue, there is the imagery of the water, which wasn't included in, say, the Rider-Waite-Smith Coleman deck. In this deck, the waters tend to represent the waters of the unconscious and conscious mind, and they flow in and out of the bridge. And we have the images of the torches, the candles, sitting on the water, which is very similar to the high priestess. And the candles in this particular deck, I think there's some Kabbalah symbolism to these candles. I'm not an expert on Kabbalah, so I'll try not to wax too philosophical on those because Kabbalah is something I would like to explore in the future. But for now, just kind of going by the text as I read it, those candles, they appear to be, based on the notes, they're representative of the female aspect of the six-pointed star. So seem to be maybe candles of enlightenment. But again, if you're familiar with Kabbalah and have an interpretation of that representation, I'd love to hear it in the comment section there. But yeah, we continue, we have the maiden again, just looking back at the maiden and the star on her chest. And I think I touched on this a little bit, how in this card we have the archetype of who the daughter who takes in the experiences of those around her, who grows from the counsel of the father and the mother and absorbs all of that experience. Now, this book also really got into a lot of the symbolism of, subduing. Let's see, what is the best way to say this? Let me see if I can get back to my notes and get back on track here. There is the imagery of virtue conquering primitive force versus an archetypal helplessness that tends to be associated with maidens, with kind of a virginal imagery. In fact, the lion tends to represent sexual energy, just kind of passion and fire, that it's always incumbent upon the maiden to overcome, to deny in some ways, to exert her strength over. In fact, a lot of the artwork tends to center female strength on an ability to repress sexual desire, to overcome sexual energy, passion, and to be a little more temperate. And there's probably, as we get into, say, the Temperance card, maybe some more imagery in that particular card. But for now, strength in tarot, and let me know what you think about this. It tends to, when you think of female strength, again, there's just kind of this archetype of overcoming sexual desire, not giving into it, and finding a way to overpower it, which can be represented, which seems to be one of the prevailing representations of female strength in this particular card here. And there is, again, the staircase, which in this deck, the staircase represents descending down into an underworld. It represents taking on a hero's journey, or maybe in the case of this card, a heroine's journey. You have to take on the underworld to emerge in one's heroic strength. It's almost as if the staircase to the underworld, going down to the dark depths, that portends a certain type of self-mastery. If you're able to conquer the deep, you can attain a, quote, treasure that's hard to attain. And that treasure can be anything, which I found that very, very interesting. My eyes always just kind of, even with everything that's going on in this particular card, there's something about this staircase that really kind of fires up my imagination more than any of the other imagery on this card. But let me know what you think. What imagery strikes you the most? What's the imagery that you would, if you're building an inner landscape and exploring this card in your imagination, what imagery would you want to interact with the most? And just kind of thinking of subduing sexual urges, sexual power, that actually makes me contrast the Thoth deck strength card. And if you're familiar with the Thoth deck and with a bunch of different decks, the Thoth deck actually refers to its major arcana card in that position as lust, but not strength. So you have the contrast of Lady Strength engaging with sexual desire, sexual power. That's very different to the Jungian Taro Deck, and very different to, I think, any other tarot deck strength card. It's another thing I find fascinating. I might do a deck study on the Thoth deck at some point too, but I think I have to work up to that. Maybe after I've been studying tarot a little bit longer, really kind of get into that. But that's one of the first associations that came to my mind, just kind of comparing the strength cards of different decks, how they diverge. And of course, last but not least, I think as we're getting to the end of our meditating time, we return to the lion itself and what it represents. Again, the lion can represent passion, lust, or creativity. When you think of ancient practices, say alchemy, for example, the lion itself is symbolic of transformation, the sort of alchemical work of the magician Mercurius. And if you've been along with me um, for this particular deck study, you might remember that the magician card, there's the association of Mercury in that particular major arcana card. But the red color of the lion is traditional in tarot as a 16th century alchemical reference. There's the process of turning lead into gold. In the color red, there's also the representation of sin. When you think of how that color is employed as certain imagery, say the scarlet color of, say, the Whore of Babylon, if you're familiar with Revelation, if you're familiar um, biblical um, biblical references such as that. There's also the association of, say, the Scarlet Letter in literature. But Jung has a different take, a slightly different take. While Jung and this particular deck also plays into the lion as representation of passion and lust, according to Jung, the color red can also, conversely, be associated with the color of the Rose of Mary. Of course, when you think of Mary, the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary, that sort of thing. So there's a certain duality to the color red as it's depicted in this particular deck, in the Red Lion, which I found very fascinating. And I think we have come to the end. At this point, my alarm has probably gone off. And if you've stayed with me this entire journey, thank you so much for watching this video. I really enjoyed studying this card, and I hope that you've got some insights out of this as well. Let me know what you think in the comments section. And until I see you again, this is Karmic Fixer Tarot.